Small farms dot the countrysides of the United States, from where I am to where you are. These dots connect us, and while they may be small, they are powerful. Let me tell you why. Welcome to One Bite is Everything, the podcast that uncovers what you don't know about your food. Every episode includes an aha moment or two, whether we're talking with a farmer or a brand that you might find in your grocery store, an expert or a thought leader, or even a historian. I learn something with every episode too, and that knowledge is power. I want you to have that. I am your host, Dana DePrima, and today we will travel to Ohio, to Melwood Farm to meet Criswell and her St. Croix sheep. It's a small farm, and it is likely not in your backyard. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't impact you. It does. You'll see.
St. Croix hair sheep are an older breed. They're a landrace breed, whereas Katahdin is sort of a composite developed breed. St. Croix evolved over hundreds of years through the slave trade, through the Caribbean islands. On the island of St. Croix is where they get their name. Whereas Katahdins were developed by a man named Michael Peel in New York in I think it was in the 50s, 60s, somewhere in that time frame.
And the hair sheep are good because you don't have to shear them and they're really raised for meat.
Correct. Very hardy. In fact, the St. Croix breed is well established to be the most parasite resistant sheep breed known, at least in this country.
Already we are deep in it. Hair sheep are good for farmers who raise sheep for lamb meat. Then they don't have the added expense and trouble of shearing them. It is increasingly difficult to find shearers, and it's a labor-intensive practice. Besides the wool issue, I will bet you didn't know that sheep are pretty delicate when it comes to their digestive systems. I have never spoken with a sheep farmer where parasite resistance wasn't a topic of conversation. You are getting your sheep on now.
And how do they do in colder climates then?
They do well. They grow a thick fur. They get really puffy for the winter time, and then they shed it all off in the springtime. Now, obviously, they can't quite compete with a big wool sheep in that regard, but there are folks who raise them all over the United States. And there are several pretty prolific breeders up in Washington State and Oregon and Idaho and so forth. So they're everywhere.
Criswell and Melwood Farm are in Ohio, right across the river from West Virginia. So close, in fact, that Criswell can see West Virginia from her porch. She has St. Croix sheep and some goats, too.
The goats, while I have harvested them for meat, I keep them mostly for fun and for property management. They help keep the brushy and viney weeds down. And I've mainly sold them to other folks as pets. I've shown a couple of times, but that's not really my cup of tea. It's very expensive and time consuming. They have very distinct personalities, far more distinct than my sheep do. My sheep do have distinct personalities, but it's more of a friendliness scale. Some of them really want their scratches and loves, and some of them don't. That's pretty much the extent of the difference in their personalities. Whereas my goats, you've got a pecking order that's very well established. So you have the queen, the diva of the entire group, and she bosses everybody else around. And then you have your lowly one that just kind of slinks around and hides all the time. You have the ones that scream at you as soon as you walk out the door because they want you to come down. They climb on things. They're little characters.
And you are intensely rotational grazing your sheep. Explain to our listeners here what that is and why it's so important to you.
You constantly move your flock from paddock to paddock. The number of days will vary based off of how fast your forage is growing, how many animals I have, how much rain we're getting, all of that. But I'd say on average, My flock stays on any given paddock for approximately 2 days. That would be the average. Sometimes they're only on their one, sometimes they're on their three. So they stay on that paddock just for that couple of days, and then I just move them to the very next paddock. Right now I have 13 very nicely set up paddocks that's really easy to rotate them through. And then I don't know if you recall from my video, I've got a back hillside that's just kind of like crazy jungle madness. And so when I put them up there, they get to stay up there for a little bit longer because they can just kind of roam about and do their thing. And then I bring them back down and we start all over again. There are several purposes. The first one is that you can maximize your forage by not having them stay in a wide open pasture all the time where they can keep going back and just eating their favorite things and letting the least favorite things get tall. Your pasture's quality will improve. I think of it like if you let a kid pick off of a buffet, they're going to skip the broccoli all the time, right? And we want them to eat their broccoli as well as the other good stuff. So by forcing them in a smaller area, but for short periods of time, they have to eat everything that's available to them there. The second purpose is, and it still has to do with forage quality, is that by constantly moving them, they aren't eating that forage down to the ground, which means that your grasses and your forbs stay healthier. They have better root systems. They come back better. So there's that. And then the final reason is for the health of the animal. Now, this doesn't apply as much to my sheep because they're very parasite resistant. But for most other breeds, rotational grazing is really important because it gets them away from the parasites. So, because if you leave them just on a wide open pasture, they just keep regrazing right over where their neighbor just pooped and the larvae are coming up. So if you keep them moving, the guidance is to not return them to the same pasture for at least 45 days. Longer is better, but that's sort of the bare minimum.
You have these paddocks already marked off, and that's with like an electrical fence.
Yes, I call it semi-permanent electric fence. It's just 2 lines of electric wire. And then I use those wire spring gates at the end of each one. And so I just go out and pull the wire and they run into the next paddock.
By the time they go through 13 and then they go up on the hill to forage, then the forage in space number 1 is ready for them again?
Yes, in most cases. Now, last year when we had the drought, that wasn't the case, but just did the best we could.
Farmers like Crystal are dealing with climate issues all the time. Their jobs have always been weather dependent, but increasingly, the swings between wet and dry are becoming more dramatic and more pronounced. According to a study from the Environmental Defense Fund, between 1989 and 2019, extreme weather events linked to climate change caused annual agricultural losses averaging $10 billion a year. Crystal and her husband Chris started Melwood Farm in 2018 with 3 pregnant ewes, little experience, a lot of trial and error, and a diagnosis of breast cancer for Crystal in the middle of the pandemic. A total storm.
I'm very thankful that I had my sheep during that time, though, because basically I checked out. And the only time I feel like I was ever actually present in the moment was when I would go out and be with my sheep. It was a safe space. They were kind to me. They were calming. So I'm very, very happy that I had them. Business-wise, it was actually a boom for us because people were in that mindset of food shortages and everybody wanted to have their own little farms all of a sudden. The homesteading movement really took off.
The homestead movement bloomed during and following the COVID-19 pandemic, as supply chain chaos, economic stress, and a collective desire for more control over our lives pushed people to get back to basics. With grocery stores running low and everyone stuck at home, many started growing their own food, raising chickens, and embracing sustainable living. Remote work gave people the chance to ditch city life for rural spaces, sparking a shift to more intentional, grounded lifestyles. Online communities were buzzing with tips and support, and homesteading became a way to boost both physical and mental health. Even after the pandemic, the movement's momentum has continued, fueled by a focus on self-sufficiency, local food, and greener living.
So I had a lot of sales, not of meat, but of breeding stock. If I could do something different, I wouldn't have gotten cancer. Yeah, and then I think we would have been in great shape. And we're in good shape with my sheep business. So I'm not displeased with it. I'm actually quite happy.
And so tell me about the business itself. You are raising sheep and you are selling goat stock, but you're also selling sheep stock and meat.
Honestly, with my sheep, the biggest sales are for breeding stock. This breed is very popular still. Membership in the breeding organization continues to grow. People keep calling and emailing, wanting to reserve little starter flocks. So that's where most of my farm income comes from. Then I have a small group of ethnic folks, primarily Muslims, but I've also made some Greek connections. And that's where I sell almost all of my meat animals. It's directly to those consumers. And then my goats, well, I'll be phasing out the goats most likely because sales there have just bottomed out. And I think it's all related to the crazy homesteading boom that happened. Most people went for little goats. They wanted the little Nigerian dwarf goats that are very cute. And now it's just flooded and I can barely sell my goats. So I'll be kind of dwindling that down and just keeping maybe 4 or 5 goats around.
And what do your flocks look like? You've got a number of goats, that number's going to go down, and sheep?
My sheep will continue to grow. I have 39 breeding ewes right now, and they're all getting ready to have babies next month. So I'll have 60 some babies running around on my property.
And are you the midwife? Is that a big role for you when they start delivering?
Yeah, luckily, that's another plus with this breed. They usually don't have problems. I mean, it's rare. I think last year I had 20, I think I want to say 7 or 8 ewes, and out of those 27 or 28, only a couple of them actually required some assistance. So, if you use the same math this year, I might have 3 or 4 that need assistance. That's not to say I don't go out and check all the time, mainly out of my own excitement.
And when you're selling breeding stock, you're selling a mature ewe? Are you selling impregnated ewes? And do you have rams around?
Right now I have 3 mature rams, and they're all from very different bloodlines. So I often will offer folks a starter flock, and that the typical starter flock for people just starting is they want 3 ewes and a ram. That's the standard. It varies, but that's the standard. In the past, what I've always done is I've just sold them all at one time, and it was usually at weaning time, so around 90 to 120 days. As I've become better at selecting animals using tools like the National Sheep Improvement Program, conformation assessments, weighing, all of that stuff, I've decided that beginning this year, I'm not letting rams leave until they're at least 6 months old, just so that I get more time to evaluate them, because don't tell the ladies I said this. The ram is the most important member of the flock because he's affecting the genetics of everybody. So he'll be at least 6 months old, but the ewe lambs still can leave at, I like to let them stay until about 120 days.
And so you're looking at your own flock and you're putting certain ewes with certain rams and tracking genetics, meaning I guess you've got to be careful that they're not too closely related. Yes, they are a certain breed of sheep, but they're not brothers and sisters and that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I also try to pair them based off of their strengths and weaknesses. So I have one ram who is my rock star when it comes to his lambs grow really fast. So I try to pair him with ewes that don't really have that trait very well. And then I have another ram who's just the opposite. His lambs do not grow. They grow like molasses, but they don't ever get worms. Like, he is the rock star of parasite resistance. So I try to pair him in that way. So it's a lot of science and looking at numbers and EBVs.
EBVs, estimated breeding values, are used to estimate an animal's genetic potential for various traits, such as growth rate, fertility, and wool quality. They help breeders make informed decisions by predicting how an animal's genetics will impact its offspring. EBVs are calculated using performance data from the animal, its relatives, and its descendants, allowing breeders to select individuals with desirable traits for improving the overall quality of their herd or flock. This method leads to more effective selection and progressive genetic improvement in breeding programs.
And is that kind of your jam, that science element?
I do like data. I am a data nerd. I like to sit in front of my spreadsheet and rank and plan.
And so what's next for you? What are you planning?
Well, we have a pretty big opportunity right now, we think, with our local Muslim community. I don't know how much other folks know about this, but they have a big holiday called Eid al-Adha.
Eid al-Adha, also known as the Festival of Sacrifice, is celebrated by millions of Muslims all over the world. This makes it one of the largest and most widely celebrated religious festivals in the world, bringing together diverse Muslim communities for communal prayers, sacrifices, and acts of charity. During the festival, Muslims slaughter a goat, sheep, or lamb. The meat is divided into 3 parts. 1/3 is for the family, 1/3 for friends and relatives, and 1/3 for those in need, emphasizing charity and community support.
And on that holiday, it's not so much about the eating, it's about the sacrifice. Most of the folks around here, they don't have farms. They don't have access to sheep. So we have been talking and we're trying to work it out, or we have worked it out, so that they can perform the sacrifice, and then we take the sheep to the custom butcher and he will finish the processing for them. If it goes well this year, there's a good chance that I won't even be able to meet demand. So this year, I absolutely cannot, just because of the timing of when my lambs are being born. So I have talked to some friends who are also local shepherds with small flocks, and I'm helping them to sell their sheep to these folks. If it works out, we will be expanding the sheep flock pretty substantially.
I can already hear my listeners' questions about the humanity of that. What does the sacrifice involve?
It's just slaughtering them. And I've watched, it's no more inhumane than how most people process a chicken or any of that. It's basically the same thing. The difference is they do not shoot the sheep. They do the throat slitting. It's very fast. The animal dies very quickly, and they always make sure that the animal is very peaceful before they even do that. So they very nicely lay them down and they stroke them and they say a prayer over them before they will do the slaughter. And then they wait until they're completely lifeless before they do anything else. I think it's actually more humane than the other way, because in the slaughterhouses, they're under a tremendous amount of stress. I mean, they're being rushed through in all these strange places, strange smells, watching all this stuff happen to their counterparts, and then they get shot. In my opinion, we have to be respectful of other folks' belief systems. They've been practicing this way for thousands of years. Who am I to question that? And if I can meet their needs while still respecting the life of my animals, I'm going to do it.
I agree with you on that in terms of we all have cultural differences, but I do think that in our society, across cultures, we have a disconnect between the fact that we're having lamb for dinner and that lamb had to go through a process to get to our plate. And it's
Yeah.
a process that we like to ignore. And I think that it's important for people to understand that there are a lot of different ways, there are a lot of different standards. And what you're describing sounds a lot more peaceful than the slaughterhouse.
And when they're my own animals, they don't even experience the stress of leaving where they've lived their entire life. You know, they don't have to get loaded into multiple trucks and transported hundreds of miles. And yeah, they just take a little walk and that's it.
And in terms of that, when you're taking your lambs mainly to a USDA processor when you're selling cuts, or you take them custom?
So I don't sell cuts because my butcher is not USDA. I'm selling a live animal, and then I'm facilitating the process of getting that animal to the butcher. So with my Greek customers, it's a lot simpler. I just take the animal while it's alive straight to my butcher, who's only about 15 minutes away. And then my butcher handles everything.
And then the whole animal goes to your client.
Yeah, my butcher calls them and tells them when he finds out how they want it cut and packaged, and then the customer picks it up from the butcher and pays them his fee.
Is lamb the meat of the sheep? Is that part of the Prime Act as well? Or is that just beef?
It is part of the Prime Act if it goes through and everything works out. Yeah.
The Prime Act, proposed legislation in Congress, encourages local meat processing by allowing states to set their own standards, reducing federal regulatory burdens for small-scale and local processors. This can lead to increased local processing, enhanced market access for niche products, and economic growth in regional areas. Overall, the Act supports local economies and food systems while promoting more consumer choice and potentially reducing environmental impacts from transportation. I have an episode specifically about the Prime Act, and I will link it in the show notes.
What are your thoughts on that?
I hope it goes through. We need more small community or at least regional butchers. It needs to be easier for butchers to get that USDA certification. My butcher has been working on it now for almost 2 years. It's crazy. Like, he thinks he's got it, and then they're so picky about one little thing, like something in his manual or something on his sticker, or it's just random crazy things that they get picky about. And it takes another 6 months for them to come back and do another inspection. This place, the first time I went there, I was just astounded. He even took me on a tour of his entire facility and showed everything to me, including the kill room floor, the animal pens, everything, and everything was spotless. I would not hesitate to sit down and have lunch on his floor. That's how clean it was. It's unfortunate that our government gets in the way of such good work and good product. It's very frustrating for everyone involved, both the farmers, the processors, and the consumers. It's very frustrating.
And do you have a community of farmers? Do you guys talk about this kind of thing?
Yes, we do. Yeah. I have several folks that I know that raise sheep, and we talk quite frequently. And they experience the same frustrations.
What are some other things that you guys are up against then?
Oh gosh, feed prices, of course, the never-ending buzzwords and labels that are out there that we feel like would add value to our product. If we could put the American grass-fed sticker or the organic sticker or the humane certified sticker, all of those things, we have the same philosophies, but going through all the hoops and paying all the fees, at the end of all of that, does it pay off? I don't know that it would, at least not for me and not for the people that I know, for small folks. Maybe it does for the big wigs. I don't know. I've considered many times to try to get at least the American grass-fed. Organic, no, it's way beyond my ability to do.
And your consumers, then, how do you communicate with them about, these are my sheep, this is my land, here's how we do it? What are you communicating with them? Are they looking for certifications, or do they just want to know back?
None of mine have ever asked And that's another reason. It apparently isn't that important, at least in my region. I'm sure there's still a subgroup within my region that it is important to, but it's so hard to obtain feed and other things that would still let me get those certifications. And I think most folks around here understand that. Now, my ethnic customers, they don't care. Most of them like to come and visit the farm before they commit to buying, which I find interesting, and I welcome that. And that's great. And I've never had a problem with any of them saying, no, never mind. They're all very happy when they come. And I think, honestly, for the most part, they're looking for, number one, do I have any pork? Am I raising swine? They don't want you to do that. But second of all, do the animals just look healthy as a group? Do they look healthy? That's the main thing my folks care about.
I think also maybe you're not at a farmer's market, so that's a little bit of a different kind of relationship.
Yeah, it is. It's direct to consumer. And because I don't have USDA, I can't go to a farmer's market. It's not that I would say that I'll never do that. Maybe, but I have to have that ability to have them processed by USDA. And I'm waiting on my butcher.
So the For Farmers grant that you received was really to support you with fencing, which obviously is a huge priority for you.
Yes, and it's expensive. So this property was like kind of left and neglected for many years. And it had some existing board fence on it. And the fence along the front road is in really bad shape. And so that's what I was looking for funding, was to get some woven wire up behind that board fence. So I don't have to worry about any of my, especially lambs, like slipping out and getting squished or causing an accident.
So you're on land that you own, and then you're on adjacent land that you lease. Is that right?
Correct.
So it's about 30 acres total.
Yes.
I'm very interested in the land lease because I feel like there are a lot of farmers that you have a space or you don't, and you want to expand, so you need land. Like, who are you leasing it from? What's your relationship, and what's the vulnerability there?
My situation is probably unique in that my neighbor, we bought our properties at basically the exact same time. This had originally been one piece of property, and the owner split it in half and sold him a piece and sold us a piece. He owns lots of acreage, but he bought this property just to keep people from buying it and putting up a bunch of houses, because that's what's happening all in this area. Anytime any flat property goes up for sale, it gets turned into a housing development. And so that's why he bought it. And so when he saw that we were raising sheep and that there were more and more of them, we became friends with him. And he said, hey, if you guys want to use mine to put them on, that's fine. Do it, because then I don't have to worry about mowing it. So that's how it started. As the years have progressed, I just pay him every year. It started out, I was just paying him a lamb. I'd have a lamb butchered and take him the lamb. But he said, it's just him and his wife. They're not eating it fast enough. So he said, just pay me whatever. And so I just give him a check for the price of a lamb every year. So,
it sounds unique.
It is. And we do a lot of stewardship of his property. We take very good care of it. We've never asked him to do any fencing upgrades. We've just done that. We put lime down. We make sure that the rotational grazing happens on his property just as well as it happens on ours, so that he can see the improvement. When we recently did soil testing and included his property so that he could see what's happening with his soil. So we've just tried very hard to maintain a really good relationship with him. And our hope is that he will eventually sell it to us so that he knows what we're going to use it for. There won't be any houses going up. So that's our hope. And he's older than us, so I think that is a likely occurrence.
And when you're talking about testing your land, from when you got it to now, what's happened?
I can't say, because we don't know what it was when we first got here. I know I've always known a lot about taking care of animals, but the science of soil and forbs and grasses. That was way beyond me. It's something that I'm slowly learning. And so this last fall was the first time that we had ever done any soil testing. But we were very pleasantly surprised. We had made some assumptions and we were way off. We thought that it was going to be terribly acidic, and it wasn't. We thought that our organic mass would be very low, and it wasn't. It was actually very good. Our nitrogen was perfect. So same with our neighbor. He was very pleasantly surprised. Now, there were some differences between our property and his, but we had been grazing our property 2 years longer than his. So you could say that maybe that difference was because of the length that the animals had been on it. Ours was slightly better than his.
Right. So they had already made more contributions to the land.
Yeah.
What else do you want to tell me about your farm that I may have missed?
Something that I do that most small producers don't do is that I do participate in the National Sheep Improvement Program. And I'm the only St. Croix breeder who's a member.
Wow.
So the National Sheep Improvement Program is basically measuring the performance of all of your flock and then using that data with some crazy algorithms, voodoo math that they have, to help determine which animals are the most likely to pass on the best genetics. And those are called estimated breeding values. So it just makes it easier, especially for someone who is still relatively new at breeding animals, to make the best selections possible. So instead of going out and having to look at 50 lambs at once and try to figure out which ones are best just by looking at them, I go out with my spreadsheet and I go, oh, that's the bottom 50%, put them over there, and now I only have to look at these. So that has been very helpful. And I'm trying very hard to get more St. Croix breeders to join with me. But it is an expense, it's work. And for folks with a really small flock, I understand their reluctance, but I hope they change their mind.
Melwood Farm, on the Ohio and West Virginia border. From that dot on the U.S. map to Muslim communities, to your environment as they sequester more carbon and important nutrients in the soil, to being part of a nationwide issue regarding the importance of regional meat processing, and to a central issue for all farmers, land access. And let's not forget, science nerd genetics and how that dot reaches into St. Croix flocks all over, bringing you healthy meat. It is so important to recognize the ripple effect that emanates from small farms to all across the country. Remember that when you shop with your local farmers. This has been another weekly episode of One Bite is Everything. That's the idea, the connectivity of it all. I hope you're feeling that. I'm so glad that you're here, and I hope that you will join me in a new episode next week. Please take a minute to give the podcast a 5-star rating and a review that will lure new folks to listen to it. Apple Podcasts is where it's at in terms of ratings, but you can also leave a review quite easily on onebiteiseverything.com. I would be so grateful to hear your thoughts. And speaking of gratitude, I'd like to give a shout out to the team that helps me make it all happen. Sonia Dillon on editing and research, and Russell Chappa on original music and sound editing. You guys are the best. I am your host, Dana DePrima, and I look forward to seeing you next week, right here on One Bite is Everything.